The night she came in, I had 4 units of compact standard O negative in the cold locker, 2 functioning pressure cuffs, and Dex Marin, who had worked beside me for 6 years, and who was at that exact moment 50 meters away in the outer bay, repairing a filtration seal that could not wait. I was alone, which was normal. Border installations run lean. You get used to the quiet. You get used to being the only person in the room when the room needs someone in it. You get used to solving problems with what you have because what you have is what there is, and waiting for more is not always an option the situation allows. What you do not get used to is the door opening at 11 at night, and 2 Velsarath warriors walking in carrying a third person between them like she weighed nothing, because she didn't, not the way she should have. They set her on the intake table, and then they stepped back with their hands at their sides, not reaching, not hovering, just standing the way soldiers stand when they have run as far as they can run, and there is nothing left to carry, and the carrying is now someone else's problem. One of them had a pressure wrap around her forearm that was leaking through at the seam. The other had nothing wrong with her that I could see, which usually means the injuries are internal, which usually means the person has been running on will alone for however long it took to get here. I did not look at them yet. I looked at her. Deep copper bronze skin, the kind that catches light like old metal when the person inside it is healthy, when the circulation is doing what circulation is supposed to do, and the blood is going where blood is supposed to go, and everything below the surface is working in the synchronized way that living things work when they are not in crisis. She was in crisis. The color had gone wrong in the specific way that color goes wrong when the body is losing the argument it is having with itself. Too cool. Too still. Her breathing was shallow enough that I counted 4 full seconds before I was certain she was doing it at all. 4 seconds is a long time to watch someone's chest for movement. It is long enough to run several calculations simultaneously. Long enough to understand that you do not have time for calculations. I got her on continuous monitoring. Started the primary assessment, found the problem in 90 seconds, penetrating abdominal trauma, left side. Bleeding that had been packing itself against a rib and slowly losing that fight for however long it had taken them to get here. Someone had field dressed it. Competent work. The kind of work that gets done under pressure by someone who knows what they are doing but does not have what they need to finish it properly. It had not been enough. The field dressing had bought time. The time was almost gone. I needed blood. The station supply was compact standard O negative human. 4 units in the cold locker, because this was a border installation, and border installations run lean. I did not have Velsarath matched product. I had never needed to carry it before. The nearest facility that might carry it was 4 hours at Hardburn. She did not have 4 hours. She might not have had 40 minutes. I stood in front of the cold locker for exactly 3 seconds. And I want to be clear about what those 3 seconds were. They were not panic. They were not hesitation in the way that hesitation means doubt. They were the particular 3 seconds of a person who has been doing trauma work long enough to know that the arithmetic matters, and that running it one more time is not cowardice. It is due diligence. It is the difference between a decision and a reflex. Option 1. Wait for matched product. 4 hours. She bleeds out in 40 minutes. Result, she dies, and the waiting did not help her, and the caution did not help her, and the protocol did not help her. She is simply dead, and I am simply standing here with the protocol intact. Option 2. Cross-species transfusion with compact O negative. Documented in the literature for 60 years. Not standard practice. Carries risks. Cascade effects are unpredictable, and in some individuals severe. But the literature is clear that it has been done. And in approximately 70% of documented emergency cases, it has bought enough time to stabilize until matched product could be obtained. 70%, which is not a guarantee. It is also not nothing. And the alternative to 70% was 0% and a body on my table and a very clean protocol record and no one alive to care about either. I pulled the first unit. The taller of the 2 soldiers said something in Velsarath that I did not catch. The other one answered. Something about a 3rd daughter. Something about a negotiation and an ambush and a transport that no longer existed. I did not need the politics. I needed to know if she had drug sensitivities. None on record, the taller one said. Trade common, careful pronunciation, making sure I understood. I got a line in. The first unit went in at the rate she needed, and I monitored for cascade response with the attention of someone who has just made a decision they cannot unmake and needs to know immediately if it is going the wrong direction. There was a brief elevation in temperature, a slight inflammatory response. I treated it. It resolved. I watched the monitors for another 10 minutes before I let myself think the word stabilizing even internally. Second unit. No incident. Her pressure started coming back, and I breathed. Finally. In the way you breathe when you have been holding something without knowing you were holding it, and it releases and you feel the release in the specific place where you were holding it. Not relief exactly. Something more functional than relief. The acknowledgement that the next 10 minutes looked different from the previous 10. The taller soldier, she told me her name was Kael. Let me redress the wound on her forearm at some point during the second hour. She did not flinch. She did not make a sound. She held the arm at the angle I needed and looked at the wall and waited until I was done, and then lowered the arm with the care of someone following precise instructions, which told me she was either very controlled or in considerably less pain than the wound suggested. With Velsarath warriors, it is usually both. Dex came in from the outer bay around hour 2. He came through the inner door and stopped. He looked at the woman on the table. He looked at the monitoring equipment. He looked at the unit running. He looked at me. He said nothing. Because Dex does not say things when the situation already contains all the relevant information, and adding words would not change the information, only add noise to it. He moved to the secondary monitoring station and took it over, and I moved back to the primary work, and we did not speak much because there was not much to say. We had been in rooms like this one before, the two of us. Not this exact room, not this exact situation, but the shape of it was familiar enough that our hands knew what to do without our mouths needing to coordinate. By hour 4, she was stable. By hour 6, she was conscious. She did not speak at first. She lay with her pale, amber eyes open and fixed on the ceiling. Not peace, not sleep, not the relaxation of someone who has come through a hard thing and is resting on the other side of it. Something more deliberate than any of those things. The look of someone who has been close enough to the edge that they are still measuring the distance back, assessing from the inside whether the distance is real or whether they are still in the part where it appears real but is not yet. I let her look at the ceiling. Dex left a cup of water within reach. Did not announce it. Did not make a production of it. Just placed it there and moved back to the monitoring station and let it sit there within reach for whenever she was ready. When she finally turned her head and looked at me, she did not say thank you. She said in trade common, with the careful deliberateness of someone who has spoken it long enough to choose every word with intent, "What did you use?" Not a question exactly. More like the beginning of an accounting. The opening line of a conversation she already knows she needs to have and is starting at the right place. I told her. Human blood. Compact O negative. Cross-species emergency protocol. The literature gave me better odds than the alternative. The alternative was watching her die on my table while I waited for a transport that could not get here in time. She turned back to the ceiling, her jaw set in a way I had already begun to learn. Not anger, not distress. The expression of someone receiving information they do not have a prepared response for. Someone who will not produce a response until they have one, and who does not consider the time spent not responding to be wasted time. It is working time. So I waited. "Is it a problem?" I said. Eventually. She was quiet for a moment that lasted longer than the question warranted. "It may become one," she said, and that was all. She did not explain. I did not press. Because I have sat with enough people in the aftermath of the worst things that have ever happened to them to understand that some answers need to arrive at their own speed. Pushing does not make them come faster. It makes them come incomplete, forced into a shape they were not ready to take, and incomplete answers are worse than waiting because they close off the space where the real answer would have been. I let it sit. She slept through most of the next 2 days. Exactly what she needed to do. I monitored. I ran the follow-up panels. I found no cascade effects beyond what I had already treated. The cross-species transfusion had, by every clinical measure I could apply, worked cleanly. Her body had accepted the foreign blood in a way the literature calls successful integration. The two warriors stayed. They slept in the outer bay on folded thermal blankets and ate from the station provisions without asking for anything that was not offered. Kael let me change her dressing on the second day. She held the arm at the angle I needed again and looked at the wall again and did not flinch again. The wound was healing cleanly, which told me she had some medical training of her own. I did not ask about it. People who have medical training and do not mention it have usually decided not to mention it for a reason. I began to understand in those early days what Velserath recovery looked like from the outside. It does not look like human recovery. With humans, there is a gradual restoration of ordinary personality, the tentative humor returning, the appetite coming back, the visible exhale as the pain recedes and the fear recedes after it. There is a recognizable arc from the emergency toward the person who existed before it. With her, it was different. There was no arc. There was a process. Methodical. She was assessing herself the way you assess equipment after significant stress. Testing range of motion. Monitoring her own pain without complaint, simply noting it as a data point. Not with dread. Not with hope. With precision. She did not complain. She did not perform comfort for my benefit. She reported when I asked and directed her attention where she chose. On the third day, she sat up without assistance and asked for something to read. I gave her the compact border installation operations manual because it was the nearest thing to hand. She read it in what appeared to be a single sitting, with the focused attention of someone for whom reading is not leisure but work, another form of information gathering. And then she said on the afternoon of the third day, without looking up from the last page, "Your filtration maintenance schedule is behind." I looked at her. "Dex is working on it," I said. "Section 12 of this manual specifies a 14-day cycle. Your log shows the last full cycle was 22 days ago. We've had a busy month." She looked at me with the amber eyes in a way that made me feel I had said something slightly foolish without being entirely clear on what specifically it was. "I am not criticizing," she said. "I am noting that the difference matters. I'll take that under advisement." She almost smiled. A small thing. The corner of her mouth. A slight shift in the set of her jaw that changed the entire geometry of her face for just under a second, and was gone. But I noted it, because it was the first time I had seen it. And the first time is the one you remember. What I did not know then was that on the fourth day after the transfusion, something happened inside the biological record the Velserath warrior caste maintains on all active members. A flag. Automatic. Triggered not by any action either of us took, but by what her own cells had done in response to the foreign blood. Her body had not merely tolerated the compact O negative, it had incorporated it, at a level that goes deeper than simple acceptance and into something the Velserath warrior compact's oldest law was designed to recognize. Because what I had not known when I put the line in what I had no reason to have read was Article 14 of the Velserath warrior compact, a provision written not for peacetime, written for the aftermath of battlefield disasters, for the moments when a warrior was the only survivor and was found by someone not of the caste, someone who knew nothing of the caste's laws or customs, someone who gave what they had because giving was the only available action. For the question of what obligation runs between a life preserved and the person who preserved it. The provision said this: blood freely given in mortal emergency binds the giver to the recipient's lineage at the cellular level. And if the recipient's body accepts the foreign blood, not merely tolerates it, but incorporates it at the level the law calls acceptance, a biological event recorded in the recipient's own cells, a thing that cannot be faked, then the giver is recognized as Velserath Keth, bonded to the warrior line by act of blood, carrying all rights and obligations that attach to that standing, including the obligation of issue. If the recipient subsequently bore a child, the child's lineage recorded both parents, both lines, equal standing, equal acknowledgement, entered into the compact's own register, and impossible to remove without the consent of both parties. I did not know any of this. On the morning of the fourth day, while I was checking supply inventory in the back corridor, and Dex was running the outer bay, the woman on the station's medical table woke earlier than usual. She lay still for a moment. Then she got up slowly with the careful deliberateness of someone assessing whether the instruction to stay horizontal still applies. She went to the scanning station. She ran a panel. She sat with the results for a long time. She did not call for me. She did not call for Dex. She went back to the recovery bench and lay down and looked at the ceiling with the amber eyes steady and the jaw set in the way I was beginning to know. She was determining. I would understand later what she was determining. At the time, I only understood that the assessment she was running had expanded to include something beyond her own physical condition. Someone else. On the morning of the seventh day, 4 people arrived at the station. Dex came to find me in the supply corridor. "They're asking for her," he said, "and they're asking about you. There." 3 of them wore the formal livery of House Vorn, deep gray, copper thread at the collar. Attire that announces before anyone speaks that this is official and sanctioned and has the weight of an institution behind it. The 4th was a man named Harlan Voss. He had the stillness of someone who has spent a professional lifetime identifying angles in a situation before anyone else in the room has found them. Not patience. Calculation wearing the costume of patience, and standing behind him, not quite with the group, and not quite apart from it, was a man I did not recognize. Younger than Voss. Taller. The copper cast of Velserath skin. The same architecture in his face that I had already learned to read on someone else's face. He did not introduce himself. He stood near the wall and said nothing, and watched everything. I went in. She was sitting upright on the recovery bench, dressed in plain gray travel clothes that Kyle had retrieved from the transport wreckage. Nothing marking her rank. She was watching the delegation with the same focused attention she had given the operations manual, reading the room for information, for patterns, for what the surface was telling her about what was happening underneath. Harlan Voss looked at me. "You are Callum Rourke, the medic who treated the patient." "I am. You administered human blood product to a Velserath warrior caste member in trauma conditions on the 8th day of the 3rd month." "I did. She was bleeding out. It was the available intervention." "You were aware of the warrior caste biological bonding provision under Article 14 of the Velserath Warrior Compact?" I looked at him. I looked at her. Her expression had not changed. "I was not," I said. "You are aware of it now," he said, and handed me a document. I read it once for the surface and once for the weight. The language was formal and layered in the way that very old law is layered. 800 years of annotation built into the original until they were inseparable. A single organism with centuries of thought running through it. And what it said was not what I had expected. Not a trap, not a punitive provision. Something closer to the opposite. A law written by people who had decided that the act of giving what is yours to keep someone else alive without being asked, without negotiating terms, without knowing who they were, first was not a transaction, could not be treated like one, required different language, deserved to be named. I put the document down. I looked at her. She had been watching me read. Every pass. Watching to see what I did with the information. Not the legal information. The information about her. About the fact that she had known since the 4th day. And had waited. And had determined. "You knew," I said. "I knew the provision existed," she said. "I did not know whether my body would accept the blood under its terms. The acceptance is biological. It either occurs or it does not. It is not chosen." And it occurred. "Yes. When were you going to tell me?" A pause. "I was determining," she said carefully, "what I wanted to do about it." The man near the wall made a small involuntary movement. the movement of a person who expected an answer and is still affected by hearing it said out loud. I filed that away. Harlan Voss cleared his throat. The House of Vorn's position is that this bond, while technically activated under the provision, was entered into without the full knowledge of either party and should be administratively dissolved as a matter of procedural. The provision does not have an administrative dissolution mechanism, she said. Not louder, not at him. Still looking at me. A pause. The House is prepared to pursue a precedent-setting challenge before the Caste Council. The House can pursue whatever it likes, she said. And now she looked at him. Fully. With the complete attention I was learning was not comfortable to receive unprepared. The question before this room is not what the House wants. The question is what Article 14 requires and what I choose. Voss went still in a different way. You are the third daughter of House Vorn in a disputed succession. You are present at a border installation because the primary line sent a faction extraction team to remove you from the Keth Varanis negotiation. You are not in a position. I am a Velsarath warrior, she said, and the copper bronze of her went very still. And the amber eyes did not move from his face. And the room changed in the way that rooms change when someone in them has stopped negotiating and is now simply stating what is. The provision under which this bond was activated applies to Velsarath warriors. My standing under it is not contingent on the House's approval of my succession position. My warrior compact membership exists independently of House politics. Voss looked at his papers. The administrative staff said nothing. I said, what does it mean for me, in practical terms? She looked at me, absorbed it the way she absorbed everything. It means, she said, that under the warrior compact you are Velsarath Keth to this house, bonded to the lineage by the act of blood given in my emergency. The House cannot erase that without your consent and mine, and neither of us was asked before they arrived here with papers. I looked at the document again. If the recipient subsequently bears a child. Yes, she said. I looked at her. Yes, she said again, more quietly, in a register that was different from everything she had said before it. The room was very quiet. I know how to stay functional in the gap between the moment of action and the moment of understanding what you have done. I know how to hold the weight at arm's length. I know how to work inside the gap until the situation allows you to close it. What I found sitting in that quiet room with a document in my hand and a woman looking at me with amber eyes that were not performing anything at all was that I did not want to hold this one at arm's length. I was not afraid of the weight. I just needed a moment to find out what it actually was. I put the document down. What do you want? I said. To her. Only to her. She looked at me for a long moment. The window above the recovery bench let in the pale morning light. It caught the copper of her skin, the color that had come back over 4 days, warming from underneath the way a forge warms before it glows. I was told growing up, she said, that the Warrior Compact's bonding provision was obsolete, that it had not been invoked in 400 years, that it was kept in the law only because removing it would require a caste council vote that no one wanted to convene. She paused. I was not told that it was written the way it was written, because the people who wrote it understood something my house has apparently forgotten. What did they understand? That when someone gives you their blood to keep you alive, she said, and asks nothing in return except that you do not die, that is not a transaction. That is a different kind of thing entirely. The old law was trying to name it. It was trying to say, we see what this is. We are not going to pretend it is something else. Voss made a sound. She raised one hand, palm out. The sound stopped. Palm. I will need to file a formal statement of recognition, she said, looking at me. Under Article 14, the Velsarath Keth must be named by the recipient before the caste record. It is the recipient's act, not the House's. A pause. I am prepared to make it now, before these witnesses. Sarath, Voss began, you are here to serve the House's interest, she said. You are not here to advise me on mine. If the House wishes to challenge the provision before the Caste Council, it may do so after the record is made. The sequence matters. Article 14 is explicit on the sequence. The naming comes first. She looked at me, and her voice shifted. Not louder, not harder. Grounded. The way that formal language requires a grounded voice to carry it. She was not performing the formality. She was using it as a tool that existed for exactly this purpose. Callum Rourke, she said. She said it the way people say a name when they are not only addressing a person but locating one, placing them precisely so there is no ambiguity about who is being bound to what follows. I am Sarath Vorn, third daughter of the warrior house Vorn, cast standing, active speaking before witnesses in the station of my emergency and recovery. A pause. The first naming. I name you as the one who gave blood freely in my mortal emergency, who did not ask who I was before he acted, because the question before him was not who I was, it was whether I would live. She did not break the register. She did not look away. The second naming. I name you as Velsorath Keth to this house and to my lineage. The blood you gave was given without condition. The acceptance my body made was without coercion. The provision exists because the people who wrote it knew that a life given freely and accepted fully is a bond that law should name rather than ignore. She breathed. One breath. Steady. The third naming. Callum Rourke. By the Velsorath Warrior Compact Article 14 in the full terms of the provision and before these witnesses, I name you as Velsorath Keth, as the acknowledged blood bond of this line, and as the second parent of the child of this lineage. She lowered her hand. This naming is my act, my choice, made in full knowledge of its terms, without compulsion, and without administrative dissolution available after the fact. Voss was very still. I was very still. The man near the wall, her brother, I understood now without having been told, was watching with an expression I could not categorize. Not shock, not approval. Something between those things. The expression of someone who came here expecting to be troubled, and is troubled in a way they did not anticipate. Sarath looked at me, the amber eyes calm, settled, the way a person is settled when they have said the true thing out loud and there is nothing left to conceal. I should have told you sooner, she said, in her own register now, hers. I was determining. I had not been certain until I watched you read that document and put it back down without stepping away from it what kind of person you were. And now you're certain, I said. You did not flinch, she said. You asked what I wanted, not what the law required of you, not what it meant for your contractor standing, not whether you could challenge the provision's applicability. You asked what I wanted. A pause. The last person who asked me that without an agenda attached to the asking was my mother. She has been dead for 6 years. I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing, which I have found in years of sitting with people in the aftermath of the worst things that have happened to them is often the right response, not because silence fills the space, but because sometimes what the space needs is someone willing to sit in it without flinching. Voss gathered himself, spoke to one of the administrative staff. The staff member wrote something down. The house will relay its position, Voss said. You may do so, she said. I will be here until I am medically cleared for transit. My medic will advise on the timeline. They left. All 4 of them. The man by the wall was the last to go. He paused at the door. He looked at his sister. She looked back at him. Something passed between them that was not mine to understand. He left. The outer bay door sealed. The room was quiet except for the hum of the filtration system. The monitor ticking along at baseline. I sat down on the stool beside the instrument bench. Kale stood in the doorway. They're gone, she said. Yes, Sarath said. Kale made a sound that was not quite an acknowledgement and not quite a question, and went back to the outer bay. The child, I said. You are certain. The station's own scanner confirmed it 2 days ago. I used the equipment in the early morning, before Dex arrived. I wanted to be certain myself before I told anyone. I have been certain for 48 hours. How far along? 6 weeks, at most, consistent with the transfusion event. I looked at the instrument bench. The scanner sat on it quiet. I did not know anything about Velserath pregnancy. I said so. I will teach you what I know, she said. Some of it will require you to read documents that are not as accessible as an operations manual. I will help you locate them, something in the way she said it. The matter-of-factness of it. The implicit assumption that we would be in the same location long enough for me to read documents she helped me locate. That there would be a future in which both of us were present and working on the same problems from the same building. You want to stay, I said. This installation has a qualified trauma medic, she said. A functioning medical bay. A filtration system that is now operating on schedule. And the man who kept me alive is here. I have been living on transport vessels and transit accommodations for 2 years over the succession dispute. I have been determining since the ambush at Kethvaranis whether there is a place in this region where I could stop determining and simply be in a place. And you think this is it, I said. I think she said that a man who asks what I want rather than what the law requires. Who gave blood to a stranger because she was dying. Who sat down on a stool after hearing that he is Velserath Keth to a warrior house and the second parent of a child he did not know he was going to be and did not run. Is the kind of person next to whom a place can be a place. She was watching me. I am not romantic, she said. I want to be accurate about that. I am telling you a practical thing. You are the kind of person I would choose to be near, if I were choosing. A pause. I am choosing now. In case the distinction matters to you. The distinction matters, I said. Good, she said. Then we are in agreement about what this is. I have not in all my years on border installations been in a room where a woman told me I was the kind of person next to whom a place can be a place. There are no protocols for it. There is no training course. There is only the choice of whether to stay in the room or leave it. And I had apparently already made that choice. By sitting down on the stool. The 26 days started the evening after they left, not formally. There was no agreed schedule, no declared plan. Sarath simply appeared at the secondary terminal after the station's evening check was done, and Dex had taken over the outer bay watch, and the medical bay had gone quiet. She sat down, opened a document, and said without looking at me, "Sit." So I sat, which is how it started, not with a conversation about what we were doing or why, just a woman with a document and a tone that assumed compliance and a man who had apparently decided somewhere between the stool and the instrument bench to be the kind of person who sits when she says sit. Fine. I had made worse decisions. The document was Article 14, full text. Not the summary Voss had handed me. The actual original. 800 years of legal language layered over itself like sediment, each century's scholars adding their annotations until the original text and its commentary were a single impossible organism that had to be read slowly, and in order to be understood at all. She read it aloud in sections, then explained each section, then asked me to explain it back in my own words, and waited without expression until I got it right. The method of someone who knows that understanding only exists when you can reproduce it. That hearing is not the same as knowing. That knowing is not the same as being able to use. I had trained junior medics this way. I had not expected to be on the receiving end. It was not comfortable, because she did not simplify. She presented the full complexity of a thing, and waited with the patience of someone who assumes competence is achievable if given sufficient time and correct presentation. Which meant I could not hide behind confusion. She would stop, back up, approach from a different angle, and wait until I got it. The Caste Council's procedural rules require the respondent to establish standing before addressing the merits, she said on the second evening. Right. What establishes your standing? Article 14, the naming. More specifically, the biological acceptance, recorded in your cells, verified independently, which means it can't be disputed on the grounds of my not having known about the provision. Because the provision doesn't require me to have known. It requires the acceptance to have occurred. She looked at me. Yes, she said. Dex brought tea at 8 o'clock every evening, set it on the corner of the terminal without comment, without interrupting. He had a precise sense of when a question is warranted and when the situation already contains all the relevant information, and a question would only add noise. He thought the situation contained all the relevant information. He was right. On the fifth evening, she said, "The House will argue that your compact medical corps affiliation creates a conflict of interest, that your standing as a contractor supersedes your standing as Velsarath Keth." Does it? No. But they will make the argument, and it will sound reasonable to someone who has not read the full text of Article 14 and the relevant precedents. How do we counter it? She was already pulling up the precedent files. She had been waiting for me to ask. She had mapped the entire conversation in advance and was moving through it at the pace I could follow, rather than the pace she would naturally move at, which was considerably faster. "There is a case," she said. 200 years old. A Velsarath Keth, who also held standing under the compact medical system. The House at the time argued that his compact standing gave an external body authority over his Article 14 rights. The Caste Council ruled that warrior compact standing is self-defining. She looked at me. "You read ahead," she said. "You left the document open." A pause. "I left it open because I intended for you to read it." "Then why are you looking at me like I did something unexpected?" "Because," she said, and there was something in the way she said it that I could not entirely read, "I expected you to wait to be told. I've been a medic long enough to know you read the whole chart, not just the presenting complaint." She looked at the document, then back at me. The amber eyes with something in them that was its own thing, neither the working expression nor the almost smile, but a third thing I was still learning the name for. "Continue," she said. So I did. The days had a rhythm. Medical work in the mornings, afternoons for whatever the station required, evenings at the terminal. Sarath was not idle during the hours we were not studying. She was never idle. She read. She corresponded through Kael. She reviewed documents in a small handwritten log she kept in the left pocket of her travel jacket. She also quietly and without announcement reorganized the medical supply inventory. I discovered this on the 8th day when I went to pull a standard trauma kit and found it in a different location. A better location. One that shaved 4 seconds off the retrieval time in a high-stress situation. I went and found her. "You reorganized my supply inventory. The previous arrangement prioritized alphabetical order over access frequency. I've been using that arrangement for 4 years. "Yes," she said. "I know." I stood there for a moment. "It's better," I said. "Yes," she said. "I know." She went back to her document. I went back to work. Dex, watching from the outer bay doorway, said nothing. But there was something in the set of his shoulders that suggested a personal reaction he was choosing not to express. This was also very Dex. The problem arrived on the 11th day. Not the problem with the law. The other problem. The one I had not seen coming because I had been looking in the wrong direction. Dex found me in the back corridor at 7 in the morning. "Someone here," he said. "Not the delegation." I went to the outer bay. The man from the wall was there, Sarath's brother. Plain clothes, no livery, no administrative staff, no transport signature that Dex had flagged on the approach registry. He had not wanted to be tracked here. This was not a visit the house knew about. Sarath came from the recovery room. She looked at him. He looked at her. And something passed between them in a single second that was the entire compressed history of 2 people who grew up in the same house and ended up here. "Rovan," she said. "They found a different approach," he said. "No greeting. The directness of someone operating on limited time. Voss advised against it. They overruled him." She was still. "What approach?" He looked at me, then back at her. "The Compact Medical Corps," he said. "They filed a formal complaint 2 days ago. The argument is that Rourke performed a cross-species transfusion without documented consent from the patient, that it violated emergency medical protocol, that the procedure constitutes a breach of contractor standards." Something went cold and specific in my chest. "If the Corps revokes his affiliation," Rovan continued, "the House will argue before the Caste Council that his Velsarath Keth standing cannot exist independently of his contractor status. that the naming was made to a person who no longer holds the professional standing he held at the time of the act. The room was quiet. Sarath had not moved, the amber eyes running the full assessment, not reacting, processing. "That is not what Article 14 says," she said. "It is not," Rovan agreed. "But it is what they will argue, and the Council has not adjudicated Article 14 in 400 years. They want uncertainty. They want the Council to hesitate." I said, "Why are you telling us this?" Rovan looked at me directly for the first time. He was younger than I had first registered, mid-30s, the same architecture in his face that his sister had, the same quality of stillness, except where hers had the weight of someone who has chosen it over a long time. His had the weight of someone making the choice right now, against something pushing back. "Because Voss told them the argument was overreach," he said, "and they overruled him." A pause. "And because our mother would not have wanted this. She had been dead for 6 years. I knew that. She had told me. And I watched what those words did to Sarath's face. Not much, but something. Small and real and quickly managed. "You are violating the house order," she said, "by being here." "Yes. If they find out, they will find out," he said, simply. "The way you say a thing you have already made peace with." I came anyway. The room held that. Then Sarath looked at me. Both of us had work to do, and now we both knew what the work was. "Get your documentation," she said. I had it. Every decision from that night, every clinical note, every timestamp, every triage calculation, every reference from the cross-species literature. 4 hours of notes, time-stamped, detailed, cross-referenced. The actual version with the uncertainty and the calculation and the weight of what was at stake. I compiled them into a formal response to the Corps, not a defense in the defensive sense, an account. This is what I found. This is what the literature said. This is the triage calculation. This is the window. This is the alternative. The alternative was watching her die. Here is the documented success rate of the intervention I chose. I did not apologize, because I had made the right call. The patient was alive. The documentation would show that every step was defensible. Sarath read the response before I sent it, page by page, making small marks in the margin. She finished, set it down. "Send it," she said. I sent it. Rovan stayed 2 hours. He and Sarath spoke in Velsarath in the recovery room. I had work to do, and I did it. When he left, Sarath came back to the terminal, sat down, opened her document, said nothing about the conversation. I said nothing. We went back to work. 12 days and the Compact Medical Corps responded. They did not revoke the affiliation, but they opened an internal review. Technically valid, procedurally uncertain. The kind of uncertainty a skilled advocate could use before a body working from a 400-year-old provision with no living precedent. "They didn't pull it," I said. "No," Sarath said. "But Voss will tell the Council that under review is sufficient to create doubt about the standing's validity at the time of the hearing." And we counter with the 200-year precedent. Article 14 standing is defined by the Warrior Compact. The Compact does not recognize external authority over its own provisions. The core complaint operates in a different legal universe than the Caste Council proceeding. She said it the way she said everything, evenly, like explaining something that is simply true. "You knew they'd go after the affiliation," I said. "I considered it a likely move," she said. "When they arrived on day 7 with a strategy that was primarily administrative rather than biological, I understood they were not going to fight the provision on its own terms, because they cannot win on its own terms. So they fight procedurally. Procedural attacks target the standing of the respondent. So you prepared for this." I prepared for several versions of this. I looked at her in the particular quiet of the terminal in the late evening, the station humming around us, the work between us on the screen. "You've been 3 moves ahead since day 1, I said. "I have been a third daughter in a contested succession for 2 years, she said. "You learn to run the scenarios, or you do not survive the scenarios. Not a complaint. Data. This is the condition. This is how I adapted. Moving on. But I sat with it anyway, because I had been doing the work of understanding her carefully, without letting what I thought I understood calcify before I had enough data to be sure. And what I was understanding was this: she was not guarded in the way that damaged people are guarded. It was not protection. It was precision. She disclosed what was relevant. She withheld what was not. And the line between those categories was the most carefully maintained boundary I had ever encountered. Occasionally, when something crossed from withheld to relevant, she disclosed it, in her own time, without ceremony, the way she told me about the child. Day 20. After the evening session, after Dex had left and the station had gone quiet. She closed the document, straightened the papers, set the pen parallel to the edge. The scanner confirmed it on the 4th day, she said. I used the equipment in the early morning before Dex arrived. I wanted to be certain before I told anyone. I wanted to know who you were before I decided whether to tell you. I did not say anything. I have been certain for longer than I should have waited. A pause. I was still running the assessment. You're always running the assessment, I said. Yes. Even now. She looked at me, the amber eyes in the quiet of the late evening. The assessment is complete, she said. I absorbed this. She was not announcing a pregnancy. She was announcing the end of an evaluation. The evidence had come in. She had reviewed it. She had reached a conclusion. The conclusion was me, not romantically, practically. But I was 42 years old, and I had spent years on border installations where the personal life was whatever you could manage between emergencies, and I had not had someone look at the actual data of who I was under pressure and decide on the basis of that data that I was who they would choose. How far along, I said, because I am a medic and that is the relevant clinical question, and also because I needed something concrete to stand on. 6 weeks, consistent with the event. I looked at the screen. The caste council ruling from 130 years ago had nothing useful to say about this. Nothing in my training did. I don't know anything about Velsarath pregnancy, I said. I know, she said. I will teach you what I know. I will help you obtain what I don't know. We will figure out the rest. We. Just like that. Part of the record. I sat there for a moment. Then I turned back to the work. Because that was what she would do. And I was learning that following her lead on when to feel things and when to continue was not weakness. It was practical intelligence. The knowledge that weight can be carried while moving forward without waiting until you have fully processed it to take the next step. The last 6 days were different in the quality of the silence between the work. We had been in the same room for 26 evenings. I knew how she held her pen, how she went still when she found a passage that mattered, how she breathed differently when she was about to correct something, and she knew how I moved when I was certain versus working toward it, how I asked questions. The difference between my silence when I was tired and my silence when I was thinking. We had not talked about any of this. We had just been in the same room doing something real together. On the 24th evening, the formal address form, run it. 7 lines, present when I needed them, not automatic, available. Your pacing on the 5th line is too uniform, she said. Break after was not coerced. Let the chair hear the space. Then continue. I tried it. Better, she said. High praise. From her. Genuine from her was worth considerably more than warm from most people. On the 26th evening, we did not study, just sat. Documents closed, tea on the corner, filtration hum steady. Did you know it would lead here? She said, not looking at me. I knew it would lead somewhere, I said. When you choose the 70%, you're accepting whatever comes with it. You don't get to choose only the parts you predicted. She was quiet for a moment. No, she said. You do not. She stood, straightened things, set the pen parallel to the edge. Sleep, she said. We leave at 6. She went to her quarters. I sat at the terminal a while longer, looking at the narrow window and the dark outside it, thinking about what it means to give without asking, not as a noble act, just as the only available response when the situation requires something you happen to have and someone else needs. Then I went to bed, because we were leaving at 6. The Velserath Primary Court sits on the second moon of the Velserath home system. I did not know this before Sareth told me. I had not had reason to know it. Border installation medics do not generally need to know the location of 800-year-old judicial chambers. We arrived the evening before the hearing. The second moon was cold. Not aggressive cold. Simply cold. Settled into the stone and the ground and the air the way cold settles into places that have been cold for a very long time and have stopped apologizing for it. The court building was stone. The kind of density that tells you immediately the building was not designed to impress anyone. It was designed to last. And it had. Longer than most governments in this region. Longer than the political entities that had created it. The benches inside were worn smooth in the middle of each seat from centuries of people sitting in exactly the same spot. Coming with the same thing, something they needed decided. Something they could not decide alone. I sat on one of those benches the evening before the hearing and thought about all the people who had sat in this exact spot. None of them probably had been a civilian contractor from a border installation who had given blood to a stranger and ended up here. I lay in the quarters the court provided and ran the formal address form in my head until the second moon's pale dawn came through the window. 7 lines. Pace the 5th one differently. Break after was not coerced. Let the chair hear the space. I knew it. And still I ran it. Because there is something in the final reading of a thing that is not about information. It is about commitment. About saying in the language of your own attention, yes. This. I know what this is, and I am going to do it anyway. I read Article 14 one last time, then I went back to bed, and this time I slept. The chamber was exactly what the stone exterior had promised. High ceiling. No ornamentation that was not structural. The lighting came from windows cut at deliberate angles, so the illumination was always even. The kind of light that does not favor anyone and does not flatter anyone and simply shows what is there to be shown. 7 council members. Elder Sauverthane in the center. Older than I had expected. Not frail, the posture was not frail, but the kind of old that accumulates in a person who has been listening carefully for a very long time. The posture of someone who has developed an efficient method for identifying the weaknesses in arguments from the first sentence forward. She read the challenge document, set it down. The House's position is that the Velserath Keth bond under Article 14 cannot attach to an act performed without the bonding party's knowledge of the provision's terms, and that the respondent's current affiliation status creates additional grounds for procedural challenge. Voss confirmed it. Added the argument about the internal review, the doubt it created about standing at the time of the naming. The respondent's position. Sarath stood. She stated her standing. 3rd daughter of House Vorn, active warrior caste member, standing not contingent on succession position. Then she stated the facts. Date of emergency. Nature of trauma, available resources, triage calculation, decision to intervene, biological outcome, cellular acceptance, verified independently, cannot be falsified, cannot be disputed. She stated that Article 14 does not require the Velserath Keth to have knowledge of the provision's terms at the time of the act. The original framers wrote it this way intentionally. She cited the framing document, page and section. The Velserath Keth is present and prepared to speak under the provision standing. Elder Sauverthane looked at me. I stood. 7 lines. The language in my mouth the way a clinical procedure is in your hands after enough repetitions. Not automatic. Available. Present at the exact moment it was needed. The 5th line I paced as she had told me. Break after was not coerced. Let the chair hear the space. And then I stepped outside the form. Because Sareth had told me to. After the form, say it in your own words. Say what happened. In the language you use when you are doing what you are trained to do, and there is no time for anything except the truth. I gave blood to keep her alive, I said. I did not ask who she was before I acted, because the question before me was not who she was. The question was whether she would live. I made the calculation I had the information to make. I chose the intervention with the better odds, and I would make the same choice again, in the same room, with the same 4 units, under the same 40-minute window. A pause. I do not consider the consequences of that choice to be a mistake. The chamber was very quiet when I sat down. Elder Sauverthane looked at me. Not the way a judge looks at a witness they are preparing to challenge. The way a person looks at a thing they have not encountered in this specific form before and are determining how to categorize. A long look. Then she turned to Voss. Voss made his arguments. The legal specialists cited passages. Sarath answered each citation with the counter she had located in 26 days of preparation. She was precise. She was complete. She was the most prepared person in the room, and the chair understood this because the chair's questions shifted gradually from Voss towards Sarath, and the tone of them shifted with it. And then Voss played his final card. The provision includes an administrative dissolution mechanism, he said. Under the conditions presented, the House submits that administrative dissolution is the appropriate remedy and invokes the relevant clause. He produced a page, placed it on the table with the care of someone placing the winning piece. Sarath waited. Let him place it. Let him look at the chair. Then she said, the administrative dissolution clause was repealed in the third reformulation of the Warrior Compact. It does not exist in the current text. Silence. I will direct the Council to the third reformulation amendment record. The repeal was deliberate. The scholars at the time determined that an administrative dissolution mechanism was inconsistent with the provision's fundamental purpose, which is to name and protect a bond that exists independent of administrative preference. She paused. The clause the House is invoking has not existed in the Compact for 160 years. Voss looked at his document. The way you look at ground, you expect it to be solid. He looked at his legal specialist. The legal specialist did not look back. He closed the document case with the particular care of someone recalibrating in real time and deciding that the most professional available option is to appear as though the recalibration is not happening. The chair set down the precedent document, made a note, looked at the full council bench. We will deliberate, she said, and then the 7 of them rose and filed out, and the chamber door closed. Just us, me and Sarath at our bench. Kyle behind us in the first row of observer seating. Harlan Voss and his staff at the opposing bench not speaking to each other, not looking at us. And Roven, at the back of the chamber in the last row nearest the wall. Not officially there. Just there, because he had decided to be, and had accepted the consequences. I looked at Sarath. She was looking at the empty council bench, not the working expression. The third thing, the one I had learned the name for. The expression of someone who has done everything that could be done and is now in the specific human moment of trying to believe it was enough. Not ready to believe it yet, because sometimes the body keeps bracing for the impact, even after the impact doesn't come. Because the nervous system has been running the crisis protocols for so long that it needs a moment to understand that the crisis is past. I did not say anything. I sat beside her and looked at the empty bench and waited. The light from the east windows moved slowly across the stone floor. 1 inch, 2 inches. The particular slow movement of light in a room that has been watching light move across its floor for centuries, and will continue watching long after everyone in it today is gone. 2 hours. The council filed back in. Elder Sauverthane sat, looked at the document in front of her, looked at our bench. The biological acceptance had occurred. Verified. Cannot be falsified. Cannot be disputed. The formal naming had been made. Correct sequence. Before sufficient witnesses. The provision does not require the bonding party's prior knowledge of its terms. The framers addressed this explicitly. They anticipated this exact circumstance, the matter of the Compact Medical Corps affiliation. The Council finds no jurisdictional basis for the Corps' designation to affect the respondents standing under the Warrior Compact. The Compact is self-defining. External bodies hold no authority over its provisions. The Administrative Dissolution Clause, repealed in the third reformulation, does not exist in the current text, cannot be invoked. The challenge does not present grounds sufficient to dissolve a provision whose terms are clearly and fully met, the chair said. The Velsarath-Keth bond under Article 14 is validly activated. The formal naming stands. The bond stands. A pause. The child's lineage will be recorded in the Warrior Compact Register under both lines. full standing on both sides. Both parents acknowledged. This is the ruling of the Caste Council, and it is final. She set down the document. The 7 members rose. A last look from the chair, not at Voss, not at his legal specialists, at me. The same look as before. The look I had not categorized. Longer this time. Something in it that I could not name but felt the weight of. And then she was gone. The chamber door closed. Voss and his staff gathered their papers in the silence of professionals who have argued a position that failed and are moving to the next thing. Voss paused at the end of the bench. He looked at Sarath. The House will relay the ruling through official channels, he said. I expect so, she said. He went. All of them went. Rovan came forward from the back of the room, stopped in the aisle near the first row, not close enough to intrude, not far enough to be absent. He looked at his sister. She looked at him. Between them was the full weight of 2 people who grew up in the same house and ended up here. The House will adapt, he said. Not a concession. A statement about how things are. The House always adapts, she said. A pause. She would have been here, he said. If she could have been. Sarath was quiet for a moment. I know, she said. Rovan looked at me. The look of someone completing an assessment that began on the 7th day in a medical bay on a border moon. You paced the 5th line correctly, he said. I was told to. I said. Something crossed his face that was not quite a smile, and was gone too fast to name. He nodded once. And then he went carrying what he was carrying, which was considerable, and which he had decided to carry before he arrived. The chamber door closed a final time. Just us. Sarath at the respondent's bench. The documents in front of her. The even light from the east windows. The worn stone of the chamber that had been holding arguments for longer than either of us could fully comprehend. She did not move immediately. She sat with the amber eyes on the empty council bench. Not the working expression. The third thing. The expression of someone who has been carrying a weight for a long time and is trying to determine whether it has actually been set down. Not ready to believe it yet. I did not say anything. I sat beside her and looked at the empty bench and waited. The light moved slowly across the floor. 1 inch. 2 inches. It is done, she said. Yes, I said. She turned and looked at me. The amber eyes in the even light. The copper of her steady. The station, she said. I would like to go back to it. Dex will have the filtration on schedule, I said. She almost smiled. Not the small one. Something more. Still brief. Still managed. But more. And this time I let myself note it properly instead of just filing it away. She stood. Kyle rose. The 3 of us walked out of the Velsarath primary court into the morning of the 2nd moon. Cold. Clear. The kind of bright that happens when there is nothing between you and the light, except thin, cold air. 13.5 months later, the medical bay of the border installation was different, not unrecognizable. The same layout, the same outer bay, the same secondary terminal where I had spent 26 evenings learning caste law from a woman who did not simplify. But the equipment was different. Upgraded. Matched Velsarath medical technology obtained through the logistical support clause in the appendix of Article 14, which I had found, because she had taught me how to read the full document, which meant the appendix, which meant the clause, which meant I knew to apply for it, which meant I had applied, which meant Compact Medical Corps had been surprised, but not unwilling to accommodate. Dex had installed it without comment. He had read the Velsarath technical format twice because it was not a format he knew, and then he had done it correctly. Because he was Dex, and that was how Dex did things. Kale was in the outer bay, 9 months at the station, now officially designated as security detail under a compact provision. Unofficially, she was also the person who had reorganized the outer bay in a way that I had not questioned, because I had accepted that reorganization was something that happened around me now, and the results were always better. She and Dex had developed a working relationship built on task completion and occasional shared assessment. As far as I knew, they had never had a conversation longer than 4 sentences. They understood each other perfectly. I had been awake since the early hours, not anxious. I do not do anxious when I have work to do. What I was standing in the medical bay with the new Velserath equipment operational and the monitoring system running what I was present, entirely present, the way I am present in a trauma situation. When everything that is not the room and the person and the work falls away, and there is only the room and the person and the work, different from any work I had done before, not the mechanics, those I had learned. 14 months of learning Velserath prenatal medicine from documents that were not easily accessible, and a woman who did not simplify, and a Dex who had decided to learn Velserath technical format because it might be useful, and with Dex, anything that might be useful became a thing he knew. Different in the way that things are different when they are yours. Sarath had not performed anything through the 14 months. She had not managed expectations. She had not tried to make it easier on me by making it smaller. She had taught me what I needed to know and let me carry the weight of knowing it and trusted that I could. She had been right. At the end of it, when the work was done and the monitoring had settled back toward the baseline it was supposed to settle toward, and the bay had gone to the particular quiet of a room that has contained something significant and is now containing its aftermath, she looked at me, steady, the amber eyes, the copper of her, all of it steady in the way she was always steady. Not the steadiness of someone unaffected, but the steadiness of someone who has decided what to do with the effect, who has been deciding that every day for 14 months alongside me. She named the child in the Velserath form, the warrior name, the lineage acknowledgement, the house recognition spoken in the formal register that the warrior compact specifies, each word placed with the precision of someone who has known this language from birth and uses it now with the full weight of what it carries. Then she looked at me. "Your turn," she said. I had had 12 months to think about it. I had thought about it on the transport back from the second moon. I had thought about it in the evenings after the terminal sessions ended and the station went quiet. I had thought about it reading Velserath prenatal documents and learning Velserath medical protocols and accepting without protest the reorganization of the outer bay and the supply inventory reorganization she had done again 3 months in, because the first reorganization had been correct, and some things benefit from being done correctly twice. I had thought about what a name is, what it is supposed to do, what it carries and what it does not need to carry. A name is not a history. It is not a declaration. It is not a flag planted in ground to claim territory. A name is the first sound someone makes in the direction of a person. The sound that says, "I see you. You are here. You have a place in the language I use for things that matter." That is all it needs to be. Dex had the compact register queued on the administrative terminal. Ready, without announcement, without needing to be asked. I spoke the name I had chosen. Soft, clear, into the quiet of the bay, into the compact register, into the record that would carry it forward in both languages, both lines, both sides of what had started in a room with 4 units of O negative and a 40-minute window, and a decision I would make the same way every time. Sarath listened. She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the child. Then she looked at me. "Still correct," she said. Not the formal register. Hers. Matter of fact and precise and carrying underneath the precision the specific weight of something meant entirely. The voice she used when she was telling me something true and wanted to make sure I understood it was true and not just being said. The filtration system hummed at the correct cycle interval. The monitor ticked along at the baseline it was supposed to tick along at. Dex closed the administrative terminal and moved to the outer bay without being asked. Kael appeared briefly in the doorway, looked at what the room contained, and went back to the outer bay without comment. This was their version of the thing. Recognition without production. Presence without performance. The language of people who show up and do the work and let the work be what it is. Outside the narrow window of the medical bay, the border moon's morning was coming in. Pale. Ordinary. The specific kind of ordinary that is not nothing. The kind that has to be built. That requires the particular decision made over and over in small rooms on difficult nights to stay in the room instead of leaving it. to give what you have, to ask nothing in return except that the person does not die. 70% is not a certainty, but it is also not nothing. And when you choose it, you accept whatever comes with it. All of it. Exactly as it is. The station ran differently after the delegation left. Not dramatically. Nothing about the external operation changed. The filtration still needed monitoring. The supply log still needed updating. The outer bay still accumulated the particular kind of disorder that outer bays accumulate when they are used heavily and maintained by people who have other priorities. Decks still arrived at the same hour every morning and left at the same hour every evening, and in between did more actual work than the station's staffing requirements suggested was possible for a single person. But something in the rhythm of the place had shifted. The way the air in a room shifts when a decision has been made in it that cannot be unmade. Not tense, something more like weighted. The presence of a thing that had been named and was now real in a way it had not been before the naming. Sarath did not treat the change as something to discuss. She treated it as the new set of conditions, and she adapted to the new conditions with the same precision she brought to everything else. She was medically cleared for light activity on the 10th day. She did not interpret light activity charitably. She interpreted it as anything that did not tear the repaired tissue in the left side of her abdomen, which was a wider interpretation than I would have endorsed, but which I had stopped arguing with because she was technically correct, and we both knew it. She started appearing in the medical bay in the mornings, not as a patient, as an additional presence, sitting at the secondary station with her handwritten log, making notes, reading documents, occasionally looking up to watch me work with the focused attention she brought to everything she was learning. "You check the monitoring in a specific sequence," she said on the third morning. "It minimizes the chance of missing a change in one reading because you're focused on another." "Which reading do you check last?" "Pressure, because pressure changes are the fastest moving. If something has changed in the time it took you to complete the sequence, pressure will show it most clearly." She made a note. I did not ask what she was noting. People who make notes in dedicated logs are keeping records for their own purposes, and the purposes do not require explanation. On the 5th morning, she said, "Your assessment sequence takes approximately 90 seconds. That's the target. The night I came in, you completed the primary assessment in 90 seconds. Yes. You have done this long enough that 90 seconds is the time it takes you to find the problem." I thought about how to answer that. 90 seconds is how long the body gives you before the window starts closing. I've been doing this long enough to fit the assessment into the window the body provides. She was quiet for a moment, making something of that, folding it into whatever map she was building. "That is a different way of understanding time," she said. "It is." "The Warrior Compact's field medicine training describes the same concept differently," she said. "It talks about reading what the body is saying before it stops being able to say it, but it frames it as a skill the warrior must develop. You frame it as a window the body offers." "Is there a difference?" "The warrior framework puts the agency with the medic. Your framework puts it with the patient." I had not thought about it that way. I sat with it for a moment. I've been doing this long enough to understand that the patient's body knows more about what is happening than I do. My job is to read what it's telling me fast enough to use the information. She wrote something in the log. On the 8th morning, she said, "Kale needs the dressing on her arm changed." "I know. I was going to do it this afternoon." "She will not ask." "I know that too." A pause. "How do you know?" "The same way I knew you weren't going to ask for the water Dex left on the 3rd day. You were waiting to see if I would notice that you needed it without being told." She looked at me. "Yes," she said. "That is correct. People who have spent a long time managing their own needs in environments where asking creates vulnerability learn not to ask. They wait to see if the person they're with notices." She was quiet for a long time after that, long enough that I had moved on to the next task before she spoke again. "My mother noticed," she said, "without being told. I thought for a long time that it was specific to her, that it was a quality she had that other people did not." "It's a trained skill," I said. "Some people come to it naturally. Most develop it through enough exposure to situations that require it. And you developed it through exposure. 11 years of trauma work on border installations. People who come through that door are not going to tell you what's wrong. They're in too much pain or too much shock, or they have been managing their own condition for so long that telling someone else feels like a failure. You learn to read what they are not saying. She considered this. Then, that is also how you knew what to do when I could not speak. I had not connected those things explicitly before. I connected them now. Yes, I said. I suppose it is. She made another note, and I went back to work thinking about the specific way that 11 years of sitting with people in their worst moments had trained me for a morning conversation with a Velsarath warrior who was recovering from penetrating abdominal trauma and had reorganized my supply inventory and was keeping a handwritten log of observations about my clinical methodology. The ways that things prepare you for other things are not always visible until the preparation has been used. On the 12th day, she asked me to show her the operations of the station's medical scanner. Not as a patient, as a student. She wanted to understand how I used it, what information it provided, how I interpreted the output and cross-referenced it against what I was observing directly. I showed her. She asked questions with the precision of someone who has a map of the territory already and is checking specific coordinates against the actual landscape, not building from zero, filling in gaps in existing knowledge. You have medical training, I said, not an accusation, an observation. Field medicine. The Warrior Compact provides extensive field medicine training. It is not the same as what you do. What's the primary difference? Field medicine assumes you are keeping someone alive long enough to get them to a facility like this one, she said. What you do assumes you are the facility. That's accurate. It requires a different relationship with uncertainty, she said. Field medicine operates with the knowledge that the definitive intervention is coming. What you do is the definitive intervention. There is no one coming after you. There's the cold locker, I said, and whatever I have in the supply bay, and 60 years of cross-species literature. The corner of her mouth, the almost smile, gone quickly but there. And the odds, she said. And the odds. I agreed. She looked at the scanner output on the screen, at the data it had generated about her own recovery. She had been reading those outputs every morning, I realized, not checking for reassurance, checking for accuracy, comparing what the scanner showed against what her own internal assessment was telling her, calibrating one against the other. Your methodology, she said. When you made the decision that night, you did not consult anyone. There was no one to consult. Dex was in the outer bay, but if there had been someone, another medic, a specialist. I thought about it. I would have consulted them if they had information I didn't have, but the decision would still have been mine. You can't outsource the decision to give blood to keep someone alive. At a certain point, the consultation has to end, and someone has to act. She was quiet. In the Warrior Compact, she said, there is a concept. It does not translate well to trade common. The closest approximation is something like the moment when the decision belongs to the hand rather than the mind, when further analysis would produce worse outcomes than action based on existing information. We have a version of that, I said. In clinical training, they describe it as the point where additional data collection costs more time than the data is worth. And you reached that point. In the 90 seconds. Yes. She made a final note in the log and closed it. She sat for a moment looking at the closed log the way she sat with things sometimes giving them the moment they required. The Warrior Compact's field medicine doctrine, she said, does not account for the scenario in which the only available medic is someone from outside the caste. It assumes the medic will be a caste member, or it assumes the warrior will not survive without a caste medic. The provision in Article 14 exists because the reality of battlefield disasters did not match the doctrine, because warriors were found and kept alive by people the doctrine had not accounted for. The law was more realistic than the training. The law was written by people who had survived the gap between the doctrine and the reality. The training was written by people who preferred the doctrine. She paused. That is a common problem. I thought about the 4 units in the cold locker, about the gap between what the installation's supply standards had anticipated and what the situation had required, about the 60 years of literature that existed because people had faced that gap before and had done something about it and had written down what they had learned. The people who wrote Article 14, I said, were they medics? Some of them. Warriors who had also trained as field surgeons, which the compact used to require of all warrior caste members. The requirement was dropped 800 years ago, but the law written by the people who held both roles survived. Because they understood both sides of the gap. Because they had stood in the gap themselves and knew what it actually required, she said, rather than what the doctrine said it should require. She stood, straightened the log, put it in her left jacket pocket. "Your filtration check is due," she said. I had not checked the time. She had. I went to check the filtration. On the 16th day, I found a document she had left on the secondary terminal. Not the log. A different one. A single page handwritten in Velsarath script on one side and Trade Common on the other. The Trade Common side was clearly a translation she had written herself. The Velsarath original was in a different hand. Older ink. I read the Trade Common side. It was a letter. Not to me. A letter from someone to someone else old enough that the names had been rendered into formal register forms that did not translate directly. But the content was clear. It was a letter from a warrior written after a battle to the person who had kept them alive, when they had no reason to expect anyone would try. Not a thank you letter. Something more specific than that. More precise. The warrior described what it had felt like to understand afterward that someone had given what they had without knowing who they were giving it to, without knowing if the giving would work, without any guarantee of return. Had simply looked at the situation and determined that the situation required action and that they were the person available to take it. The warrior had written, "I did not know how to name what you did until the law gave me the language for it. I am grateful for both, for what you did and for the language, because unnamed things are harder to carry." I set the document down. I did not mention it to her. She had left it on the terminal because she intended me to read it. She would know I had read it from the position it was in when she returned. That would be enough for whatever she needed it to be. Some things do not require discussion. They require only that the other person knows you have understood. The formal address form was 7 lines, and I had practiced it until the language was in me the way clinical skills are in your hands, after enough repetitions present at need available without retrieval overhead. But there was a difference between knowing the form and knowing what the form was for. She explained it on the 20th evening, when we had moved past the evidentiary material and into the question of how I would actually stand in front of the caste council and use what I knew. "The form is not decorative," she said. "Every line carries a specific legal function. The form exists because the provision requires each function to be executed in a specific sequence for the record to be valid. If any line is omitted or the sequence is altered, the record can be challenged on formal grounds." What does each line do? She went through them one by one. The first line established the speaker's identity and standing. The second established the context of the speaking, the time, place, and circumstances. The third named the act. The fourth named the actor. The fifth established what the act was not coerced, not transactional, not made under conditions that invalidated the provision's terms. The sixth established what the act was given freely, accepted fully, creating the bond the provision was designed to recognize. The seventh made the formal record stating the provision under which the recognition was being made, and the complete name of the Velsarath Keth being recognized. 7 lines, I said. 7 legal functions. The provision's scholars have written extensively about the number, she said with a quality in her voice that I had come to recognize as the closest she came to dry humor. There are 7 moons in the Velsarath primary system. The correspondence is not coincidental. The scholars found meaning in it. The scholars always find meaning in things. That is what scholars are for. The quality intensified slightly. Whether the meaning was intended by the original authors is a separate question that the scholars have also written extensively about and not resolved. I looked at the form again, at the 5th line specifically, at the sequence of negations that established what the act had not been. The 5th line is the hardest to deliver, I said. Yes, because it requires you to know not just what happened, but what did not happen. To make negative claims about your own intentions at a specific moment in the past. And to make them credibly, she said. The council will be listening for hesitation on the fifth line, not because hesitation means you are lying, but because hesitation means you are uncertain. And uncertainty about your own intentions is the opening Voss needs. If you hesitate, he will argue that you are not certain the act was freely given. And if you are not certain, neither is the record. So the fifth line requires certainty. It requires the kind of certainty that comes from knowing what you actually did, she said. Not performance of certainty, actual certainty, which you have, because you know what you did. I read the fifth line again. What the act was not. Not coerced, not transactional, not made under conditions that would invalidate the provision's terms. None of those things were true of what had happened that night. I had been alone in a room with 4 units of blood, and a woman dying on my table, and a window of approximately 40 minutes. There had been no coercion because there had been no one in the room to coerce me. There had been no transaction because there had been no time for one, and I would not have conducted one anyway. The conditions had been exactly what they had been, clean of complication in that specific way. The arithmetic of a situation that requires action and offers you the resources to take it, and then simply waits to see what you do. I had given blood to keep someone alive. That was what had happened. That was all that had happened. And the fifth line's function was simply to state that nothing else had happened at the same time. The fifth line, I said, is the easiest one to deliver, because there is nothing to be uncertain about. She looked at me. Yes, she said. I know. A pause. That is why I told you to pace it differently, not because you will hesitate, because the council will expect you to hesitate. And when you do not, the absence of hesitation will be its own testimony. I thought about that. You are not just preparing me to answer the challenge, I said. You are preparing me to be something the challenge does not expect. The challenge expects a civilian contractor who does not fully understand the provision, and who is uncertain about his standing, and who can be maneuvered procedurally, because he does not know the rules well enough to prevent it, she said. I am preparing you to be someone who knows the rules precisely, who knows why they exist, who can speak to the provision's terms in the language the provision actually uses, and who is not uncertain about a single thing that happened in that room. A pause. Because you are not uncertain. You were not uncertain then, and you are not uncertain now, and the council will be able to see that if you deliver the form the way I have taught you to deliver it. I looked at the 7th line, the final line, the one that made the formal record. You were uncertain about me, I said. That is why you waited. Yes. But you are not uncertain now. No. The assessment is complete. I told you that, she said in the tone she used when I was restating something she had already stated clearly and did not require restating, but when she was also underneath the mild correction, acknowledging that I had heard her correctly. I know, I said. I am telling you that I heard it. She looked at the form on the screen, then back at me. Run the 5th line, she said. I ran it. Better, she said, and we went back to work. On the morning we left for the second moon, Dex made breakfast. He did not announce this. He simply appeared in the station's small common area at 5:30, with food from the station's provisions prepared in the particular way that Dex prepared things, which was without flourish and without unnecessary steps, and with the result of something that was exactly what it was supposed to be, and nothing more. Sarath ate without comment, which was her version of acknowledgement. Kale ate with the focused efficiency of someone who views meals as fuel. I ate and thought about the 7 lines and the 5 lines pacing and the long stone chamber that Sarath had described in detail one evening, so that I would not arrive at it unprepared, and find that the space itself had done something unexpected to my delivery. The chamber absorbs sound, she had said. The stone walls. You will feel like you are speaking into a space that is taking your words and not giving them back the way you expect. Adjust your pace accordingly, a fraction slower than you would speak in a normal room. How much slower? Enough that the words have time to reach the back of the chamber before you speak the next ones, not slow enough to sound hesitant. The pace of someone who knows what they are saying and is saying it with sufficient care that the meaning arrives intact. I had practiced this in the medical bay when no one was there, speaking the 7 lines at the pace she had described and listening to the way the sound of them moved in the air and learning the feel of it. At 6 o'clock, Kyle moved to the transport access. Sareth stood in the doorway of the medical bay for a moment looking at it, not sentimentally, with the focused attention of someone taking an inventory of the space and its current state and the state it should be in when they returned. "The filtration," she said. "Dex will maintain it," I said. She nodded once and went to the transport. I stood in the doorway of the medical bay for a moment after she had gone. The monitor ticked along at baseline. The filtration hummed. The supply inventory was organized in the sequence she had established on the 8th day of her recovery, which was a better sequence than the one I had used before, and which I had been using for 23 days now, and which had on 3 occasions made a genuine difference to the speed of my response. The cold locker held 4 units of compact standard O negative. The same 4 units. Different crisis. I went to the transport. At the end of the 2 hours of deliberation before Elder Soverthane began to read the ruling, there was a moment. Just a moment. Less than 5 seconds. The 7 council members had filed back in. They had taken their seats in the same sequence they had left them. The chair had received the formal document from the member on her left. She had looked at it, not reading yet, looking, and then she looked at us, not at Voss, not at his legal specialists or his administrative staff, at our bench, at Sarath first for approximately 2 seconds with the particular look of someone who has spent their professional life evaluating respondents and is making a final evaluation before the record is stated. And then at me. For longer, I have thought about what was in that look since the day it happened. I do not have a complete accounting of it. But part of it, I think, was this. She had read the provision many times. She had read the framing documents and the 200-year precedent and the 3rd reformulation amendment record. She had read all of the things that Sarath had placed before the council in the previous hours, with all the precision of someone who had spent 26 days finding exactly the right documents and presenting them in exactly the right sequence. And what the chair was assessing in those few seconds before she began to read was whether the person at the respondent's bench matched what the provision was designed for. The provision had been written for someone who gave without knowing, who acted because the situation required action and they were the person available to take it, who would do it again because the calculation would be the same. I had said so, in my own words, after the 7 lines, without hesitation, without performance. And she was looking at me to see if the person who had said those words was the person who had done the thing. I looked back at her. I did not say anything. There was nothing to say. I had said what I had to say. She held the look for the full 5 seconds, and then she looked down at the document and began to read. I had my answer before she gave it, not because I was certain the ruling would be in our favor, but because I understood in those 5 seconds what she had seen when she looked at me. And I understood that she had looked at me that way because what she had seen matched what she needed to see for the ruling she had already reached. The rest was formality, important formality, the kind that gives things their weight in the world, the kind that makes real what would otherwise be only true, but formality nonetheless. The ruling was what it was. The bond stood. The naming stood. The child's lineage would be recorded under both lines with full standing on both sides. And when it was over, and the chamber had emptied, and Rovan had gone, and Kale was near the door, and Sarath was still sitting with the amber eyes on the empty bench doing the thing where she sat with the weight until she was ready to determine whether it had actually been set down, I sat beside her and waited, because that was the thing I had learned. In 26 days of evenings at the terminal, and mornings in the medical bay, and the particular silence of a station at night when the work is done and the next thing has not started yet. The thing she had taught me without teaching it, just by being the person she was, in the specific way she was that person. Some things do not need to be fixed. Some things do not need to be filled in, or made lighter, or resolved. Some things just need someone willing to sit in them without flinching, without looking for the fastest exit, without performing comfort. Just sitting, just being there. Just letting the weight of the thing be the weight it actually was until the person carrying it was ready to determine what to do with it. "It is done," she said. "Yes," I said. And it was. Outside the narrow window of the Velserath primary court, the second moon's morning was doing what second moon mornings do, which is arrive quietly and without announcement, and simply be there when you look up from what you have been doing and realize that the dark has become light without your having noticed the transition. We walked out into it, the three of us. Cold air, clear sky. The kind of brightness that has no warmth in it, but has clarity instead, which is a different thing and sometimes more useful. Kyle went ahead to arrange the transport paperwork. Sarath and I stood at the top of the court steps for a moment. She was looking at the transit platform below, not at anything specific on it. At the whole of it, the way she looked at things when she was orienting, taking in the space and its components and her position within it. I was looking at her, at the copper of her in the cold morning light, at the way she stood, which was the way she always stood, with the particular quality of someone who occupies space deliberately rather than incidentally, who has decided to be exactly where they are rather than finding themselves there. "Rovan will have trouble," I said. "Yes." "From the house. For being here." "Yes." A pause. He was prepared for that. "Is there anything we can do?" She considered it. Not directly. He made his decision with full knowledge of the consequences. Intervening would suggest he needed protection from his own choices. Another pause. "But there are other ways. The ruling creates a different legal landscape than the House had anticipated. That landscape has implications that extend beyond our situation. Rovan understands how to use implications." "He is more like you than the House expected," I said. She looked at me then. The amber eyes with something in them that was, I thought, closer to surprise than I had seen from her before. Not dramatic surprise. The small shift of someone who had not expected a specific observation and is now accounting for the fact that it had been made accurately. "Yes," she said after a moment. "I believe he is." We went down the steps. The transport back was smaller than the one we had taken to the second moon. Kyle had arranged something that prioritized speed over comfort, which was consistent with Kyle's general approach to logistics. Sarath did not comment on the seats. I did not comment on the seats. We sat in them, and the transport moved, and the second moon's surface gave way to the transit corridor, and then to the view of open space, that border installation. People spend enough time looking at that it stops being remarkable and becomes simply the backdrop against which everything else happens. Sarath slept. Not immediately. For a while she sat with her handwritten log open on her knee, not writing in it, reading something she had already written, going back over notes, running the kind of review that comes after a significant event, when the event has resolved, and you have time to assess what the documentation of it actually contains. Then she closed the log, put it in her left jacket pocket, and slept. I watched the transit corridor for a while. I thought about 26 evenings at the terminal, about the 7 lines and the 5th line's pacing and the way she had said better in the tone that meant the answer was correct and required no further elaboration. I thought about the cold locker and the 4 units and the 90 seconds and the arithmetic of a situation that requires something from you and then simply waits to see what you do. I thought about what it means to make a decision in the gap between action and understanding, to do the thing the situation requires, and then to wait while the world catches up with what you have done and reveals all the things the thing has set in motion that you could not have predicted. The gap between the moment I put the first unit in and the moment Harlan Voss handed me a document in my own medical bay was 48 hours. The gap between that moment and the moment Elder Sovra Thane set down the ruling and said, "This is the ruling of the Caste Council and it is final," was 33 days. The gap between the moment I chose to give what I had and the morning I stood at the top of the court steps looking at the second moon's cold, clear sky was 34 days and 11 years. And whatever it is that builds up in a person across the work they have done, and the rooms they have sat in, and the decisions they have made when no one was watching and the outcome was uncertain, all of it had been present in that room, not consciously, not as something I was drawing on with intention. Just present the way things are present that have become part of you over enough time and enough repetition. The way a clinical procedure is in your hands, the way the formal address form was in my mouth, the way the knowledge of when to speak and when to sit and when to simply be in the room with someone without trying to fix or fill or resolve, the way that knowledge had been in me built from years of sitting with people in the worst moments of their lives and had been there when I needed it in a different kind of room for a different kind of purpose. None of it had been wasted. That is what I found myself thinking in the transit corridor with the open space beyond the window, and Sarath sleeping across from me and Kyle up front running through what I assumed was a logistics assessment of the remaining travel time. None of it had been wasted, not the 11 years. Not the border installations and the lean supplies and the long nights alone with whatever the situation had brought through the door. Not the cross-species literature that I had read because it was part of the professional library I maintained, and I maintained it because you cannot know in advance which part of it you will need. Not the 4 units in the cold locker, not the 90 seconds, not the decision itself. None of it. All of it had been building toward the capacity to be the right person in a specific room, on a specific night, with a specific 40-minute window, and a specific decision to make. And when the decision had been made, it had set in motion everything that followed, which was, I supposed, how it always worked. You cannot choose the consequences. You can only choose the action, and then you accept what comes with it, all of it, exactly as it is. Sarath shifted slightly in her sleep, adjusted her position with the unconscious precision of someone who had learned over years of sleeping in transit accommodations how to find the most stable angle available in an uncomfortable seat. The log was still in her left jacket pocket. Her hands were relaxed in her lap. She looked in sleep like someone who had put down something heavy, not permanently. She would pick it back up when she woke. The succession dispute was not resolved. The house would continue to adapt, which in House Vorn's case meant continuing to maneuver. Rovan would face consequences that might or might not be navigable. The child's standing would create implications that would need to be managed over years and probably decades. None of that was done, but for now in the transit corridor with the open space beyond the window and the second moon receding behind us and the border installation ahead, she had put something down. And I watched her sleep and thought about the second moon's cold morning light and the look on Elder Sovrathane's face in those 5 seconds before the ruling, and the way Rovan had said you paced the 5th line correctly in the tone of someone confirming something they had needed to see confirmed. And I thought about the name I would choose. I had 12 months. That was enough time to find the right one. The border installation came into view on the transit display approximately 4 hours after we left the second moon. Sarath was awake by then, sitting with the log open and a pen moving in it, making notes with the focused efficiency of someone catching up on documentation that had accumulated during a period when other things had required priority attention. Kyle from the front of the transport said, 14 minutes. Sarath did not look up from the log. Thank you. I looked at the installation on the display, at the particular configuration of lights that marked its outer structure, at the filtration intake and output ports that were from this distance too small to see clearly, but that I knew the location of with the precision of someone who has walked past them every day for long enough that their position is simply part of how the building looks. Dex will have made tea, I said. Sarath looked up from the log. He does that, I said. When something significant has happened and he thinks the people involved might need something when they arrive, he times it so it is ready when you walk in. She was quiet for a moment. He has done this before, she said, every time I have come back from a situation that required more than the ordinary response. I thought about the specific occasions, about the times I had come back from off-station trauma calls or medical conference trips, or the 2 emergency transits that had taken me away for more than a week. He never mentions it. He just has tea ready and leaves it where you will find it. He is a good person to work beside, she said. Yes, I said. He is. She went back to the log. But something in her posture had shifted. The small adjustment that meant she had filed something away in the category of things that mattered. I watched the installation getting closer on the display, and thought about Dex making tea in the station's small common area, and checking the filtration, and updating the supply logs, and running the outer bay with the quiet competence of someone who does not need oversight or acknowledgement, but who is simply present and capable and steady. There are people like that in every station, in every team, in every room where important work gets done. People who do not announce themselves, who simply continue, who make it possible for the larger work to happen by keeping the smaller work running without drama or ceremony. You notice them when you come back. When the tea is ready and the filtration is on schedule and the supply logs are updated and the outer bay is in a state that suggests continuous maintenance rather than crisis response. You notice them and you are grateful, and you do not say so in so many words, because people like that do not need the words. They need the tea to be received. They need the work to continue. They need the station to still be functioning when you return. That is what they are for, and they know it, and they do it. Kyle said docking in 8 minutes. Sarath closed the log. I looked at the installation one more time on the display. At the filtration ports, and the outer bay access, and the medical bay window that I could not see from this angle, but that I knew was there on the eastern side of the structure, the one that let in the pale morning light when the border moon's short morning arrived. We were going back, and it was where we were going. The tea was ready. Dex had it on the counter in the common area. 3 cups, which told me he had known Kale was with us, which told me he had been tracking the transport registry, which he would not have mentioned, and I would not have asked about. Sarath picked up one of the cups, held it for a moment, looked at it the way she looked at things that were telling her something she was in the process of understanding. Then she drank, and that was that. The station settled back into its rhythm. Dex to the outer bay. Kale to whatever Kale did in the hours that were not spent in direct proximity to Sarath, which appeared to be a combination of maintenance tasks and what I had come to recognize as her version of rest, which looked like stillness and was probably not. Sarath went to the secondary terminal. I went to the medical bay, and we were back. The 14 months that followed were the most education-dense period of my adult life, and I had spent 26 days in what I had thought was an education-dense period, which gave me some basis for comparison. Velsarath prenatal medicine is not like human prenatal medicine. Not in its structure, not in its timeline, not in its approach to what the body needs and when and why. The biology is parallel in enough ways that some of the clinical frameworks transfer with modification, but the modifications matter, and getting them wrong has consequences that the Velsarath medical literature documents in considerable and specific detail. Sarath taught me what she knew, which was considerable. Warrior Compact members received extensive biological education as part of their training, and Sarath had supplemented this with additional study in the years since her posting to contested border zones where the medical resources were variable, and the assumption that a specialist would be available was not always warranted. She did not simplify. She did not make things easier than they were. She presented the full complexity of what her biology required and what it would require over the following months, and waited with the patience of someone who assumes competence is achievable, while I worked through understanding it. I worked through it, not without difficulty. There were sections of the documentation that required rereading 4 and 5 times before the structure of what was being said became clear. There were biological processes with no human analog that required a kind of conceptual flexibility that my training had not specifically prepared me for. But I had been a trauma medic for long enough to know that the edge of your training is not the edge of what you can learn. And I had spent 26 evenings across from a woman who had demonstrated by teaching me Article 14 and all of its precedents, and the complete procedural rules of the Caste Council, that the question of what a person can understand is mostly a question of whether they are willing to do the work required to understand it. I was willing. I learned. The months built on each other the way months do when you are doing real work in a place you have committed to, not dramatically, incrementally, each week adding to what the previous week had established. each piece of documentation read and understood becoming part of the foundation on which the next piece rested. Sarath monitored her own condition with the methodical precision I had observed during her initial recovery. She reported what she observed. She asked the clinical questions that needed asking. She accepted my assessments when they matched her internal readings, and flagged the occasions when they did not, which led to productive discussions about the limits of the equipment and the interpretation of data at the edge of its calibration range. We had those discussions at the secondary terminal in the evenings, the way we had discussed Article 14 and the Cast Council procedural rules. The same terminal, the same tea from Dex at 8 o'clock, the same quality of working silence in between the specific exchanges, different material, the same method. Dex updated the supply logs to reflect the expanded medical inventory. He did this without being asked, and without making an adjustment to the station's administrative structure that required approval. He simply integrated the new documentation requirements into the existing framework and continued. Kyle began spending more time in the medical bay, not as a patient, as an observer. She watched me run the monitoring protocols and the assessment sequences with the focused attention of someone who is learning something and does not feel the need to announce that they are learning it. On the 43rd day of the 14 months, she asked me a clinical question about the monitoring equipment, about what a specific reading indicated and what the range of normal was, and what would constitute a deviation that warranted attention. I answered it. She made a note on a small card she kept in the breast pocket of her uniform, added it to what was apparently a growing collection of small cards. After that, she asked a clinical question approximately every 3 days. I answered all of them. She did not thank me. She filed the answers on her small cards and continued doing what she did, which was being present and competent and steady in the specific way that Kyle was those things. On the 67th day, I found her in the medical bay at 6 in the morning, running the monitoring sequence I had shown her on the 4th day. She had asked a clinical question, not with instruction, on her own, in the correct sequence. I watched her complete it from the doorway. When she had finished, she looked at the readings, made a note on a small card, looked up and saw me. She did not appear embarrassed. She did not appear to feel that she had been caught doing something she was not supposed to be doing. She looked at me with the direct Velsarath attention that I had grown accustomed to and said, "The secondary pressure reading was 11 units higher than yesterday. Within normal range for this stage," I said, "but worth tracking. Check it again tomorrow at the same time." She made another note on the small card. "I will," she said, and she left. I stood in the medical bay for a moment after she had gone, looking at the monitoring equipment, at the small incremental marks on the display that tracked the ongoing condition of a pregnancy that was, by every clinical measure I had learned to read, progressing in a way that matched the documentation's description of what correct progression looked like. I thought about a woman named Kale who had a pressure wrap around her forearm on the night she carried someone through my door, who had let me redress her wound without flinching, and had held the arm at the angle I needed, and had looked at the wall with the patience of someone doing what was required, who had kept 3 months of clinical questions on small cards in her breast pocket, who ran the monitoring sequence alone at 6 in the morning because the monitoring mattered and she was the person available to do it. None of it was wasted. None of it. On the morning of the birth, the medical bay was quiet, in the way it gets quiet before something significant happens. Not ominous, just waited. The particular quality of a space that knows what it is about to be used for, and is ready. Dex was at the secondary monitoring station running the readings with the focused competence of someone who had spent 4 months learning Velsarath monitoring protocols by working through the documentation on his own time and integrating what he learned into the station's operational procedures without mentioning it. Kale was at the door, not inside, at the threshold, present. I was doing the work, and at the end of the work, when the monitoring settled back toward the baseline it was supposed to settle toward, and the bay went quiet, with the specific quiet of a room that has contained something enormous, and is now simply containing its aftermath. She looked at me, the amber eyes, the copper of her, all of it steady in the way she was always steady. She named the child in the Velsarath form, each word placed with the precision of someone who has known this language from birth and uses it now with the full weight of everything it carries. Not ceremony for the sake of ceremony. Function. The provision requires the naming. The naming creates the record. The record creates the standing. The standing protects the child in ways that will matter for years, and possibly decades, in ways neither of us can fully anticipate. She named the child. Then she looked at me. "Your turn," she said. I had spent 12 months thinking about it. Not constantly. Not in the anxious way of someone who cannot let a problem go. In the background way of a question you know you will eventually have to answer, and that benefits from being considered slowly rather than forced. I had thought about what names are for, what they do, what they carry, and what they should carry, and what they do not need to carry, because the child will carry their own weight in time, and a name that is too heavy at the beginning does not help. A name is not a history. It is not a summary of what brought two people to a room together and what happened when they got there. It is not a memorial to a decision made with 4 units of O negative and 70% and a 40-minute window. A name is the first sound someone makes in the direction of a person. It is the beginning of the language you will use for the rest of your life when you mean this one specific person and no one else. That is all it needs to be. I spoke the name I had chosen, soft, clear, into the quiet, into the record that Dex had queued on the administrative terminal without being asked, as he had queued it and was ready with it because he had understood that it would need to be ready and had made it ready, into the record that would carry it forward, in both languages, under both lines, with full standing on both sides of what had started in a room with 4 units of O negative and a decision that I would make the same way every time. Sarath listened. She looked at the child. Then she looked at me. "Still correct," she said. Not the formal register. Hers. The one I had learned over 14 months of evenings and mornings, and the particular silences in between. The voice she used when she was telling me something true and wanted to make sure I understood that it was true, and not merely being said. The filtration system hummed at the correct cycle interval. The monitor ticked along at the baseline it was supposed to tick along at. Dex closed the administrative terminal and moved to the outer bay without being asked. Because that was what the moment required, and Dex understood what moments required. Kyle appeared briefly in the doorway, looked at what the room contained, made a sound that was not quite a word, and was not quite not one, and went back to the outer bay. The station's morning was coming in through the narrow window, pale, ordinary, the specific kind of ordinary that has to be built. That requires the particular decision made over and over in small rooms on difficult nights to give what you have, to stay in the room, to sit on the stool, to accept whatever comes with the choice you made. All of it, exactly as it is.